the National Organized Crime Commission all unanimously agreed that Marcello would be the one to take over the New Orleans syndicate.
From his humble beginnings as an immigrant to his rise to power in the New Orleans crime family, to influence that extended far beyond the borders of Louisiana, Carlos Marcello, a man who became known to many as the mob, who ran the U.S. drug trade. His rise to power saw him named as one of the most notorious crime bosses with deep connections to the dark underbelly of the drug trade. But how exactly did he do it? Let's find out. Marcello ran the U.S. drug trade. Carlos Marcello, born Calogero Minacor on February 6, 1910, in Tunis, French Tunisia, was destined for a life of crime. His Sicilian immigrant parents, Giuseppe and Luigi Minacore, brought him to the United States in 1911, settling in a decaying plantation house near Metairie, a suburb of New Orleans. Little did they know that their son would become one of the most notorious crime bosses in American history. Growing up in the vibrant and gritty streets of New Orleans, Marcello was drawn to the allure of the French Quarter. It was here that he embarked on a path of petty crime, forming a crew of teenage gangsters who carried out armed robberies in the small towns surrounding the city. Marcello's audacity and cunning earned him comparisons to the infamous Fagin from Charles Dickens's novel Oliver Twist. However, Marcello's criminal activities did not go unnoticed by the law. In 1929, he was convicted for his involvement in a series of armed robberies and sentenced to the Louisiana State Penitentiary in West Feliciana Parish for 9 years. Behind bars, Marcello's reputation as a formidable figure grew, and he became a force to be reckoned with even within the confines of the prison walls. Released after serving just 5 years of his sentence, Marcello wasted no time in making his mark on the criminal underworld. In 1938, he was arrested once again, this time for the sale of over 10 kilograms of marijuana. Despite facing another lengthy prison sentence and a hefty fine, Marcello managed to serve less than 10 months and pay a mere $400 fine, thanks to a deal cut with former Governor Huey Long.
Marcello would spend a year in the Atlanta Federal Penitentiary on narcotics charges for distributing marijuana, but his political connections probably enabled him to get out quickly.
Marcello's release from prison marked a turning point in his life. He became associated with Frank Costello, the influential leader of the Genovese crime family in New York City. Marcello's role in transporting illegal slot machines from New York to New Orleans solidified his position as a trusted and valuable asset within the criminal underworld. His rise to power continued as he took control of Louisiana's illegal gambling network by the end of 1947. He also joined forces with Meyer Lansky, a prominent figure in organized crime, to skim money from some of the most important casinos in the New Orleans area. Marcello's association with the Todaro family through marriage further solidified his influence and connections within the criminal hierarchy. As Marcello's power grew, so did his reputation. He was selected as the godfather of the New Orleans Mafia by the family's capos, and with the approval of the commission, following the deportation of his predecessor, Silvestro Carola, to Sicily. Marcello's reign as the godfather would last for the next 30 years, during which he would establish himself as one of the most feared and powerful crime bosses in the United States. In 1951, Marcello's notoriety reached new heights when he appeared before the U.S. Senate's Kefauver Committee on Organized Crime.
Mr. Halley, all due respect to the Senate, which I have an awful lot of respect for, I'm not going to answer another question. You just says I'm not under arrest and I'm going to walk out.
Refusing to cooperate, he pleaded the Fifth Amendment 152 times, earning him the title of one of the worst criminals in the country. Marcello's defiance only fueled his reputation as a formidable figure in the criminal underworld and solidified his position as a force to be reckoned with. In 1961, Carlos Marcello, a prominent figure in the world of organized crime, was required to check in with the Immigration and Naturalization Service. This is after his immigration status became public during the Kefauver hearings in 1951. It is worth mentioning that during the Kefauver hearings, Marcello had contemplated the possibility of being deported and had his associates explore potential South American countries where he could claim to be born as an alternative to Italy or Tunisia, his actual places of birth.
Marcello, of course, was born in Tunisia, North Africa, and technically was a citizen of that country and possibly Sicily, where his parents came from.
This led to the discovery of Guatemala, where Marcello had interests in various industries such as shrimping, tomatoes, and cannabis. With the assistance of his associates, Marcello obtained a birth certificate from the mountain village of San Jose Pinula in Guatemala, which he could use to claim Guatemalan citizenship. On the morning of April 4, 1961, Marcello arrived for his regular check-in with his attorney, Philip Smith. However, upon his arrival, Marcello sent sense that something was amiss, as he was immediately escorted into an office. He was then presented with a letter stating that he was considered a citizen of Guatemala, and as a result, his visa was overdue, leading to his immediate deportation back to his supposed home country. Subsequently, Marcello was placed in handcuffs by 2 immigration officers, and a 3-car convoy rushed him to Moisan Airport, where an INS plane awaited him. He was flown to a Guatemalan Air Force base, where he was met by Colonel Antonio Batres, the second in command of the Guatemalan Air Force. Colonel Batres extended all courtesies to Marcello, and together they vanished from the radar of immigration authorities. After Marcello's eventful deportation from the United States to Guatemala, he found himself in a new and unfamiliar environment. Accompanied by his attorney, Philip Smith, Marcello arrived at the Hotel Biltmore in Guatemala City, known as the city's most luxurious establishment. However, the hotel was not without its challenges. As Marcello settled into his new surroundings, he soon discovered that the hotel was swarming with reporters eagerly waiting for the arrival of the infamous tomato salesman from Louisiana. Recognizing the potential risks of staying at the hotel, Colonel Antonio Batres, the Guatemalan Air Force's second in command, intervened to ensure Marcello's safety. On April 5, 1961, Marcello decided to visit the immigration office in Guatemala City to present his papers proving his Guatemalan citizenship. The immigration officials in Guatemala City seemed satisfied with the documents Marcello presented. This raised questions about the authenticity of the papers and the thoroughness of the immigration process. Nevertheless, Marcello's claim of Guatemalan citizenship was accepted, at least for the time being. On Friday, April 21st, an order for Marcello's arrest came down from Judge Rafael Leonza Parada when it was determined that the birth records for Calogero Minacor Ferrugia, Luis Marcello's maiden name was Ferrugia, Carlos's mother in the town of San Jose Pinula, were forged. The ink used apparently was not a match for the ink used in 1910. The ink also was not faded, as the other entries for that time period. And lastly, the total amounts of births recorded for 1910 in the village were one less than the total counted up with Calogero's name added to the list. Marcello was promptly arrested as he entered the lobby of the Biltmore Hotel, where his family were waiting for him. The Guatemalan authorities, led by President Miguel Ydigoras, were determined to rid their country of Marcello and his criminal activities. However, they soon realized that finding a country willing to accept the albeit 51-year-old tomato salesman was no easy task. Despite attempts by the Immigration and Naturalization Service to deport him to Italy, Tunisia, and France, no nation would take him. This led to a dilemma for Guatemala, as they grappled with the problem of what to do with this undesirable mobster within their borders. Marcello's time away from the United States was short-lived. On June 2nd, word had made the rounds that Marcello was back, and he was thought to be in the Shreveport area. There were several theories about how he got back. One of them was that he was flown back to New Orleans from Honduras in a private plane. The other theory was that Marcello was flown to Miami aboard a Dominican Republic Air Force jet on the orders of the country's president, General Rafael Trujillo. Nevertheless, he managed to return to New Orleans, evading the government's efforts to keep him out of the country. From that point on, Marcello became a master at fighting off deportation attempts, successfully evading the government's repeated efforts to remove him from the United States. In November 1963, Marcello faced trial for conspiracy to defraud the United States government by obtaining a false Guatemalan birth certificate and conspiracy to obstruct the United States government in the exercise of its right to deport him. Surprisingly, he was acquitted on both charges later that month. However, Marcello's legal troubles were far from over. In October 1964, Marcello found himself facing new charges. This time, he was accused of conspiring to obstruct justice by fixing a juror, Rudolf Hitler, and seeking the murder of a government witness, Karl Knoll. Marcello's attorney admitted that Hitler had been bribed, but argued that there was no evidence connecting the bribe to Marcello. To make matters more complicated, Knoll refused to testify against Marcello in the case. In the end, Marcello was acquitted of both charges, leaving the government frustrated and his reputation as a Teflon Don intact.
He could give orders to people that eventually would have to carry those orders out and maybe expose themselves more than he would be. He was safe, as evidenced by the number of years that we tried to investigate him and got nowhere.
But the legal battles didn't stop there. In September 1966, Marcello faced a new set of charges. 13 members of the New York, Louisiana, and Florida crime families were arrested for consorting with known criminals at the La Stella restaurant in Queens, New York. Marcello, however, managed to evade the charges as they were later dropped. Just a few days after the incident, Marcello found himself in trouble again, this time for assaulting an FBI agent. His first trial resulted in a hung jury, but he was retried and convicted. Marcello Marcello was sentenced to 2 years but served less than 6 months. The legal drama surrounding Marcello didn't end there. In 1981, he faced one of his most high-profile trials. Marcello, along with Aubrey Young, Charles Romer II, and 2 other men, was indicted on charges of conspiracy, racketeering, and mail-and-wire fraud. The charges stemmed from an FBI probe known as Lab. The trial garnered significant attention as it exposed corruption at the highest levels of state government. During the trial, secretly recorded conversations were admitted as evidence, revealing the extent of the corruption. U.S. District Judge Maury Sear allowed the admission of these recordings, which demonstrated Marcello's involvement in the bribery scheme. In the end, Marcello and Romer were convicted, while Young and the 2 others were acquitted. The trial marked a significant blow to Marcello's criminal empire and further tarnished his reputation. While Marcello faced numerous legal battles throughout his life, it was his alleged involvement in the assassination of President John F. Kennedy that would forever link his name to one of the most shocking events in American history. The House Select Committee on Assassinations recognized the possibility of organized crime involvement in Kennedy's assassination, and Marcello's name was frequently mentioned in connection with the conspiracy. However, direct evidence of his complicity was never established. Other mob leaders that ran the U.S. drug trade. While Carlos Marcello's career as a godfather and a drug lord was riddled by court cases, a man who had everything favoring him was one Lucky Luciano. Lucky Luciano, born Salvatore Lucania in Sicily, Italy in 1897, Luciano's path ended by being one of the most notorious gangsters who dominated the U.S. drug trade. From his humble beginnings to becoming the boss of the Genovese crime family, his father found work in a sulfur mine, but young Luciano had different plans for his future. At the tender age of 14, Luciano dropped out of school and took up a job delivering hats. However, the allure of the streets soon drew him in, and he found himself entangled in the world of street crime. Luciano quickly realized that there was power in numbers, and he set out to form his own gang. With the streets of New York as his playground, Luciano's gang offered protection to Jewish youngsters who were often targeted by other criminal elements. This act of defiance against the prevailing prejudices of the time earned him the respect and loyalty of his peers. But it was during this period that Luciano's path would intersect with another young gangster who would become his lifelong partner in crime, Meyer Lansky. Luciano and Lansky, both teenagers at the time, formed a lasting partnership that would shape the course of organized crime in America. Together, they navigated the treacherous world of street crime, honing their skills and building their reputations. It was during this time that Luciano earned the nickname Lucky after surviving a severe beating and throat slashing.
He was picked up by 4 gangsters, apparently, around 50th Street in New York City. They beat him up terribly. He was bloodied and stabbed and kicked around and left for dead.
This brush with death only served to fuel his ambition and determination, but it was his partnership with Lansky that truly set Luciano apart. Together, they formed a formidable duo, combining their strengths and complementing each other's weaknesses. Luciano's street smarts and Lansky's financial acumen created a powerful combination that would shape the future of organized crime. Despite his criminal activities, Luciano managed to evade the clutches of the law. He was arrested multiple times, but his cunning and ability to evade conviction kept him out of prison. It seemed as though luck was always on his side, allowing him to continue his rise through the ranks of the criminal underworld.
When Lucky told a story, when Lucky said anything at all, everybody listened. Yeah, yeah, Lucky, yeah. Lucky laughed, everybody laughed. It was just wonderful to watch this. But when he got mad, it's like a knife. Right at you.
As Luciano's influence grew, so did his reputation. He became known as a shrewd and ruthless operator, someone who could get things done. His ability to navigate the complex web of criminal alliances and rivalries set him apart from his peers. Luciano was a force to be reckoned with, and those who crossed him would soon learn the consequences of their actions. As the United States plunged into the era of Prohibition, Lucky Luciano saw an opportunity to amass a fortune and solidify his power within the criminal underworld. He became deeply involved in the lucrative business of bootlegging, working under the wing of the infamous gangster Arnold Rothstein. With Rothstein's financial backing, Luciano built his own bootlegging operation, which quickly became a force to be reckoned with. His operation grossed over $12 million per year, a staggering sum in those times. Alongside his partner in crime Lansky, they joined forces with the Mafia godfather of the New Orleans Mafia, Carlos Marcello, who was promised a cut of the money skimmed from Las Vegas casinos in exchange for providing muscle in Florida real estate deals. deals. Luciano's keen business sense and ability to navigate the treacherous waters of the illegal alcohol trade propelled him to new heights of power and influence. But Luciano's ambitions didn't stop at bootlegging. He had his sights set on something much bigger, control over the criminal underworld itself. Luciano's rise to power continued as he became a top aide in the criminal organization led by Joe Masseria, a powerful figure in the American Mafia. It was during this time that Luciano found himself embroiled in a bloody conflict known as the Castellammarese War. This war erupted between rival mafia factions vying for control over the lucrative bootlegging territories. Luciano played a key role in this violent struggle, using his cunning and strategic mind to navigate the treacherous landscape of gang warfare. On April 15, 1931, Masseria, accompanied by Luciano for a session of drinking, playing cards, and dining at one of his favorite restaurants at Nuova Villa Tamaro, a restaurant in Coney Island, Brooklyn. It was a hit for lovers of seafood.
At a certain point, Luciano excuses himself and goes to the men's room, and just at that point, remarkably enough, in come the assassins and kill Joe the boss.
The gunmen were suspected to be Benjamin Bugsy Siegel, Albert Anastasia, Joe Adonis, and Vito Genovese. After the death of Masseria, Luciano seized the opportunity to take over his gang and expand his influence even further. He became the lieutenant of Salvatore Maranzano, another powerful figure in the criminal underworld. But Luciano had bigger plans in mind. He wanted to put an end to the constant bloodshed and establish a more structured and profitable criminal enterprise. In a bold move, Luciano formed the Commission, a governing body for organized crime. This unprecedented move aimed to prevent future gang wars and establish a hierarchy that would bring stability to the criminal underworld. The commission consisted of the heads of the major crime families, including Luciano himself. This governing body would make decisions and settle disputes, ensuring a more organized and profitable criminal enterprise. Luciano's vision and leadership were instrumental in shaping the American Mafia as we know it today. Under his guidance, the commission brought a level of order and structure to the criminal underworld that had never been seen before. It marked a turning point in the history of organized crime, ushering in a new era of cooperation and profitability.
Organized crime families were pulling in as much money as the 10 largest industrial corporations in the United States put together.
So, how come the Mafia were separated when their unison proved to be more profitable? What did Joe Masseria do wrong that he lost his position as the boss, unlike his counterpart Carlos Marcello, who managed to maintain his position as the godfather of the New Orleans crime family for 36 years? As we will see, Joe Masseria's reign in the Genovese crime family was cut short by new blood. In the 1920s, the Italian-American Mafia in the United States was under the control of Giuseppe Joe the Boss Masseria. His faction consisted mainly of gangsters from Sicily, along with members from the Calabria and Campania regions of southern Italy. Masseria's faction included prominent figures such as Lucky Luciano, Albert Mad Hatter Anastasia, Vito Genovese, Alfred Mineo, Willie Moretti, Joe Adonis, and Frank Costello. They were known as the Mustache Petes due to their long mustaches and adherence to old world ways. However, another powerful Sicilian figure, Don Vito Ferro, sought to challenge Masseria's control over the mafia operations. To achieve this, he sent Salvatore Maranzano from his base in Castellammare del Golfo, Sicily, to seize control of the mafia in New York City. Maranzano's faction, known as the Castellammares, included influential figures such as Joseph Joe Bananas Bonanno, Stefano the Undertaker Magadino, Joseph Profaci, and Joe Aiello. As tensions between Masseria and Maranzano escalated, it became clear that a clash for leadership of the mafia was inevitable. However, the Castellammares War was not just a battle between these two factions. It also represented a generational conflict within the Italian-American Mafia. The old guard, represented by the Mustache Petes, adhered to traditional Sicilian ways and refused to do business with non-Italians. On the other hand, the younger and more diverse Italian-American group, known as the Young Turks, had grown up in the United States and were more forward-thinking. Led by Lucky Luciano, the Young Turks aimed to end the war quickly and modernize the Mafia. The Young Turks believed that Masseria's leadership was inadequate for the changing times of the 1930s. They saw the war as unnecessary and detrimental to their criminal enterprises. Their objective was to modernize the mob and do away with unnecessary orthodox norms. This vision attracted followers who had witnessed the limitations of Masseria's traditionalist leadership. As a result, both factions were fluid, with many mobsters switching sides or even killing their own allies during the war. Tensions between the Maranzano and Masseria factions had been building for years, with frequent clashes over control and resources. One notable point of contention was the hijacking of each other's alcohol trucks, as alcohol production was illegal in the United States at that time due to Prohibition. These conflicts set the stage for the violent and bloody hostilities that would erupt in the Castellamarese War. The opening salvo in the war was fired within the Masseria faction itself, when on February 26, 1930, Masseria ordered the murder of an ally, Gaetano Reina. Masseria gave the job to a young Vito Genovese, who carried out the killing with a shotgun. Masseria's intention was to protect his secret allies, Tommy Galliano, Tommy Lucchese, and Dominic the Gap Petrilli. However, this act of treachery would come back to haunt Masseria, as the Reina family then threw their support behind Maranzano. The war continued to escalate as the Castellamarese loyalists executed a key Masseria enforcer, Giuseppe Morello, in August 1930. 2 weeks later, Masseria suffered another blow when the Reina family shot and killed Joseph Pinzolo, whom Masseria had appointed to take over the ice distribution racket. These acts of violence further solidified the alliance between the Reina family and the Castellamarese. Masseria retaliated by ordering the murder of Joe Aiello, the president of the Chicago Unione Siciliana, in October 1930. However, these acts of violence only served to turn the tide in favor of the Castellamarese. On November 5, 1930, two key members of Masseria's gang, Mineo and Ferrigno, were murdered. Francesco Scalice inherited control of Mineo's gang and subsequently defected to the Maranzano faction. Many other members of Masseria's gang also began defecting to Maranzano, blurring the battle lines of the conflict. With the war turning against him, Masseria's allies, Luciano and Genovese, started communicating with Maranzano. They struck a deal. Luciano would arrange for Masseria to be murdered, and Maranzano would bring an end to the Castellamarese War. On April 15, 1931, Masseria arrived for lunch in his favorite restaurant, Nuova Villa Tamaro in Coney Island. He arrived in his armored car with two bodyguards. They were led to a table in the back, where another man who is believed to be Lucky Luciano was already seated. Masseria ordered light, just some bread, wine, and coffee. After the meal was served, owner Gerardo Scarpato instructed his mother-in-law to remain in the Exile kitchen while he casually took a walk from the building. Masseria was killed, taking 4 bullets to the back and 1 to the head. His body slammed into the table, then to the floor. The entourage quickly exited the restaurant and entered waiting getaway vehicles. The death of Masseria marked the end of the war, but it was only the beginning of a new era in the American Mafia. Salvatore Maranzano declared himself boss of all bosses and organized the Mafia in New York City into a clear structure and hierarchy. The 5 families were established, led by Luciano, Joe Bonanno, Joseph Profaci, Vincent Mangano, and Thomas Gagliano. Maranzano's reign, however, was short-lived. On September 25, 1931, he was killed by assassins on behalf of Lucky Luciano. With the old guard out of the way, Luciano becomes chairman of the board of New York's 5 families. The different mobs that ran the drug trade in the U.S. will be remembered for a long time. Mobsters like Carlos Marcello, Lucky Luciano, and Joe Masseria have a special place in history books. Although they are romanticized in pop culture, their reign was characterized by death and destruction, a factor that should never be overlooked, lest history repeats itself. If you enjoyed watching this video, click on one of the boxes playing on your screen to watch more similar content.